welcome to a rather special Scots Whay Hae podcast, where we once again collaborate with Edinburgh International Book Festival and Publishing Scotland. My name is Alistair Braidwood, and you're listening to the Shaping Scotland Stories New Voices podcast. In a moment, I'll be talking to representatives from 8 of Scotland's publishers who talk all about working with new writers and new voices and a lot more. But first, I spoke to the Executive Director of Edinburgh International Book Festival, Sophie Moxon. Now, to properly introduce this podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by the Executive Director of the Edinburgh International Book Festival, Sophie Moxon. Hello, Sophie.
Hi, Alistair. Hi.
So first of all, I wanted to ask you, the title of the event and this podcast is Shaping Scotland Stories, New Voices. How important is it to the book festival that new voices are being published?
I mean, it's absolutely fundamental. To be honest, without new voices getting published, the book festival would, stagnate and wither and die. We ultimately, at the book festival, we try and create conversations, and those conversations need to be as diverse as possible, and that includes that means including writers at every stage of their career. To create that really, really rich dialogue. And to be honest as well, the new voices of today are going to become potentially the very established voice of the future. Ian Rankin was a new voice when he appeared at the book festival in the 80s. So, we see it as part of our role to nurture those voices, give them a platform. Yeah, I mean, I can't quite underline strongly enough how important it is to us.
And I guess, the Edinburgh Book Festival, it's been going on so long, it can take that overview and see how that affects it. Whereas perhaps there's a pressure if a festival's quite fresh to think, well, who's going to get bums on seats? Who's going to be the big names? But as you say, it's a kind of short-sighted view if you take that.
Yeah, and I think, new writers are embedded across our program. I don't think new writers necessarily need to be kind of corralled in a kind of new voices strand, though obviously that can work really well. The approach we take is like I say, embedding new writers throughout. So yeah, we have showcase events, but we also create conversations and discussions and debates that include a range of voices from writers at all stages in their career.
And that feeds into my next question, which was going to be how the festival supports new writers. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about that, but are there other things that you do?
Yeah, well, like I said, the main thing we try and do is obviously, like I say, embed writers throughout the programme. So it's not just a kind of new writers showcase. That not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with those. They're really valuable opportunities to engage with and experience a whole range of writers. But ensuring new voices are across the whole programme, ensuring their books are in the bookshop. That the new writers are, all our writers are given the opportunity to sign their books. I mean, another strand of work we do, I guess you'd call them cross art form commissions, where we work with writers and put them together with other creative practitioners, theatre makers, musicians, filmmakers, and allow them to explore how unpacking their books in a different art form, how audiences can engage with that. So we offer those kind of opportunities to a whole range of authors, including relatively new voices.
I mean, looking through the festival programme for this year, what's jumped out is that it is so much more than just a book festival. There are, as you say, there's pieces of theatre, there's cross-genre events going on, and so much more. Now, the New Voices event is part of the Business of Books series of events. Can you tell us a bit about that series and why it was so important to put on?
So we've been doing Business of Books for a few years now. My brilliant colleague Kate Seiler has, really taken it to new heights this year. It's really evolved over the last few years. I mean, the reason we started doing it is we were so aware that the book festival, in some ways played a role as a kind of unofficial hub for the sector. So there was almost this kind of slightly hidden side to it, where it was a gathering place for the people who were in the business of books, agents, publishers, other writers, other festival programmers. So we started to try and create events that particularly played to that audience and created a more, if you like, structured way for them to gather, debate, explore relevant issues. So that's where it's born from. And then we started to realize that whilst it was an industry program, there was also a more general audience who were really interested in learning more about how our industry works. And so the business of books now, it straddles both worlds, and it's a public program as well.
And it also brings together writers and publishers in a way that perhaps didn't happen previously. You know, it was a different relationship. Was that something that you saw as important?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like I say, it's looking at all the relationships that are implicit in what we do, and creating, I guess, like I say, more formal opportunities and platforms for them to engage in discourse, and like I said, particularly talk about the challenges and issues that the industry is facing, how we can improve, how we can do better as an industry. So yeah, it's all really important, and it's all really fascinating as well. And I can't wait to see how the business of books continues to evolve over the coming years.
And Shaping Scotland's Stories, New Voices is in partnership with Publishing Scotland. How important is that relationship?
Publishing Scotland is a really important relationship. I mean, we've been working with Publishing Scotland for years. We've got a great relationship, and we also enjoy really good relationships as colleagues, if you like. There's some really great, almost kind of personal relationships there between the organisations. But yeah, I mean, again, another fundamental part of what we do is providing a showcase for contemporary Scottish publishing, and it's something that we really want to regrow. I mean, obviously during the pandemic, so many things had to be compressed, had to change, but as we continue to breathe out over the next few years, it's something we really want to grow, and I'm just really glad that we're getting to work together on this event this year.
Well, Sophie, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been a pleasure, Alistair. Thank you.
I'm joined now by Heather McDade from 404 Inc. Hello, Heather.
Hi.
So what can you tell us about 404 Inc. and its history?
So 404 Inc. is an independent publisher founded by myself and my co-founder, Laura Jones. This was like back in 2016 when we were both quite recent graduates. And I think our ethos back then was, we just thought publishing could be a bit more loud and a bit more fun. When publishers were publishing their books, they were very politely being like, oh, look, here's a great book. And we were like, you can be rowdier, you can shout about books. And that was kind of something we wanted to do, was just find books that excited us and then just kind of shout about them. And I think 6 years on, that's still very much the ethos. If a book comes into 404 and it excites us, we're just like, we feel like we can do something with this. And then our goal is to just get it in front of as many people as possible. I was going to say as obnoxiously but maybe not obnoxiously, but as loudly and as excitedly as possible. So yeah, I'd say that's.
Is it still the two of you that make that decision?
Yeah, so it's Laura and I make all the kind of core decisions, and then we work with a freelance network to kind of make it happen. So.
And what areas do you cover or specialise in?
So we publish fiction, non-fiction, and poetry. We've done a few poetry books so far. Fiction has been our main thing. So we published Chris McQueer's first short story collections, Helen McClory's first few collections. We've recently been working with Elle Nash, who's an amazing author who lives in America but has actually relocated to Glasgow now. We have some novels now, which is kind of a recent development. So that's the fiction side. Non-fiction, we have collections like Nasty Women. Our first essay collection was quite a big one for us. Then we have some memoir meets investigations. And then we have our new non-fiction series, Inklings, which is every month or two we publish a pocket-sized book, which is about 20,000 words. And it's kind of like big ideas in small packages is how we describe it. And so I'd say overall more like contemporary fiction and non-fiction, but really it's just like books that kind of excite you or make you think or just evoke some kind of feeling or reaction is what we're looking for in our books. So,
and tell us a little bit more about the Inkling series, because that is done in a different way.
Yeah, so our Inkling series, when we ask for book pitches, we usually, like most publishers, ask them for a sample of the writing and a project that's vastly underway. But for Inklings, we just ask basically, if you could write a book about anything, what would it be? And you pitch it in 200 words. And then there's like a small process between that and commission, just to make sure that it could be a book project. But really, we just want people to have the freedom to not have committed to a project and be years down the road, because that's like a lot of barriers to be like, you have to be set on this idea, you have to do it. And we just kind of give people free rein to be like, if you could write one thing, what would it be? And some of the books have been about the queer revolution of Schitt's Creek. We have one about Prince's fashion. We have a lot of lived experience books, exploring kind of issues across society and history. Stuff looking at structural reimaginings of university. It's a very broad range, actually. Our new one that's coming out is They Came to Slay, which is looking at the queer culture of Dungeons and Dragons. And that's, yeah, it's just a kind of a big variety. We kind of pitch it to the curious reader, like, so you don't have to commit to a 300-page book to get a sense of something. It's just like a little dipping of the toe. And then if it's something you're interested in, you can like kind of go on from there. So.
And we'll be talking about new voices in a moment, but another great way of getting new voices out there, I suppose.
Yeah, it's been really good because I guess on a boring level, we used to run a literary magazine, and that was like a really good way for us to find new writers who might go on to do bigger projects, and we had to close it a few years ago. So this is another way that we find all these amazing writers, get to work with them on a shorter form. Inklings are kind of like a replacement for the magazine in that we get to work with writers in a shorter form. And then if they have book projects down the road, we have already worked with them, or we can pinpoint, oh, you're really good, we think there's a book in you, or something like that. Liam Coleman, who we published his debut novel earlier this year, he came to us through the Inkling series and was a dream to work with, amazing writer. And then when he was also like, oh, here's my novel, we were just like, we'll take both. And it's like a nice way of like seeing what's out there, again, without having to be like, you have to have a full book, you have to do this. It's just kind of like finding people on the radar.
And in terms of the business of publishing, kind of what advice would you give to others or those thinking of getting involved?
I think for us, it's like twofold. I'm speaking on behalf of Laura as well, but I think she would agree with me on this, is like, when you talk about the business of books, is to always remember it's a business. So I think we all come to it because we love books, we're passionate about it, but at the end of the day, it's still a business. So it's not, I guess, not to get jaded or like surprised or caught off guard by that. Like sometimes there will just be boring tasks, or there will be stuff that you're like, I really want to do this stuff, but you can't do it then. It's just always remembering that's part of like a bigger picture. And on a personal side, we're always like, the things that you're most passionate about are the things that have the highest risk of burning you out. So it's also just like an awareness. I don't mean to be like, after all the talk of books being like, books are just books, but they are just books, and like, it's not worth your well-being. So we're always like, be passionate about it, but have boundaries, is kind of our personal mantra that we try to pass on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Know when to kind of walk away or just take the time. And we were talking about new voices with earlier on, and this is part of this thread. How important is it that new voices are published, and what are the challenges in doing that?
I think that's really important, especially as an independent publisher. Like we collective independent publishers are like the people who are discovering a lot of the new voices that then the big publishers will come along and then amplify later down the line. And I think as well, there's so few opportunities to really go from writing a manuscript to like the dream advance to like the big publisher. There's all these steps in between. And I think independent publishers are really good for being on the ground and seeing who's coming through and just spotlighting amazing writers. And it's just really important because the publishing industry is not alone in this, but it's quite bad compared to some others of being like quite insular and exclusionary, and the same people benefiting from the same structures. And there's just, yeah, people just need to kind of keep promoting new voices and helping people get their foot in the door, and then also keeping the door open for other people to come through. Like otherwise it's just not going to change. So yeah.
And finally, can you talk about 3 of your current or future titles that you're excited about?
Yes. So earlier this year we published the debut novel The Arena of the Unwell by Liam Coleman. So as I said earlier, he came through our Inkling series, but Laura and I are both massive music fans. We've always wanted to publish a book about music, and we just never found the right one. But Liam captures just something amazing about the music scene. Like he writes about it from experience, but he just captures like mental ill health, not being, he captures like mental ill health in a really original and like realistic way. And he just writes, he's like funny. He writes like sex really good. He just writes all the stuff that is usually more difficult for a writer to do. It just comes really naturally to him, and it's just such an amazing novel. And I think as 30 somethings who grew up in the gig scene, like it's a book that really like speaks to us, and I think now that it's out, we're seeing it's reaching kind of similar people. The next book is Elle Nash's short story collection Nudes. So Elle's just an amazing writer. I don't really know what else to say about her. She's just one of those, she's so naturally talented, and her writing is really like dark and evocative. And I think the best way to describe her is like her writing like evokes a reaction. So like you don't passively read Elle Nash. You usually like read a story and then you're just like, whew, I need to take a break from that. Yeah. But I think for us, that's like the most exciting thing. Like she deals with like women and I mean a lot of working class women, the complications of that, but it's just like very confrontational writing, and it's not intentionally confrontational, like trying to provoke you, but it's just, it forces you to like look at yourself or look at society or look at these questions or morality and all this kind of stuff. And I just think she's very underrated. So obviously she's only recently moved to the UK, but I think she's just going to keep publishing work that is very like powerful and amazing. So I think going forward, there's just a lot to come from Elle. And the last book is Carrie Kills a Man, which is out in November, but it's a memoir by the broadcaster and musician Carrie Marshall. And it's about, well, the tagline that she gave us, which is better than anything we could come up with, is how a transgender rock star killed a depressed suburban dad. And it's her story of coming out and her story of her life as a trans woman and just all that comes with that. But even when she pitched it, she was just like, this is not a misery memoir. And it's not to say that there's not a place for like dealing with the darker side of it and the harder side. And there is a lot of that in the book, but she's just so funny. And she was just like, my life is funny. Like I go about day, I laugh all the time. So why would my book not do that? And I just think it's such a good book and it's just so joyful. And I'm really excited for people to read that one. So
I can't wait to read it myself. It sounds fantastic. Thank you so much, Heather, for taking the time to have a chat. It's been great talking to you.
You too.
I'm delighted to be joined now by Rebecca Wojturska, Managing Director of Haunt Publishing. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello.
So first of all, can you talk a bit about Haunt Publishing and its history?
Yeah, so Haunt Publishing is a small independent press based in Fife. We're kind of dedicated to exploring both traditional and contemporary Gothic and horror literature. Overall, we just try to hold a flickering candle to global and underrepresented voices.
So you've spoken a little bit already about what areas do you specialise in. Maybe you could say why you specialise in those areas.
Yeah, so I've grown up always loving kind of horror. You know, I grew up on a diet of Goosebumps and point horror. And then I studied kind of Gothic literature at university. I did a publishing master's. And it all just came together into thinking, I want to see more of this type of genre, but I want to see it without some of the tropes that I don't enjoy. So I thought I may as well do it then. So that's kind of why I set it up. It originally was going to be just Gothic literature, but I did expand into pretty much immediately into horror and generally dark fiction. I didn't want to pigeonhole myself too much. In that sense. So I'm pretty loose with the definition, but we don't publish other genres such as science fiction or fantasy, for example.
Okay. So this panel is looking at new voices in particular. How important is it that new voices are published and what are the challenges in doing so? Maybe particularly in such a kind of small or niche genres.
Yeah, so I mean, we think it's hugely important to hear voices from people who have been historically marginalised or underrepresented. It is an issue across the board, but in horror particularly, as I mentioned before, there can be harmful tropes, such as othering of certain people and presenting those people as a threat. So that's kind of where horror fails, I think. And it's an issue that Haunt is trying to address. So I guess part of the challenges in doing that is a lot of people are so wedded to these tropes. Maybe they don't understand why they're problematic or harmful, but so kind of doing the work around that. And also just ensuring that people know that you're a safe space for marginalized voices, that they're someone you're someone they can come to with their work and trust and know that they're going to be in good hands. So kind of building that reputation as a newer publisher is definitely a challenge. And we try to tackle it just by being us. So the kind of work that we publish, just the kind of people we are. So yeah, I think those are the kind of challenges in horror at the minute.
So with that in mind, are you almost entirely dealing with new writers coming through rather than people that have been doing for a while? If that's what if you're looking to kind of carve a new niche and with different representations, is it new writers that you're looking to?
Yeah, so we do a bit of a mix. Some of our writers have written for a while, like short stories, for example. Some of them are completely new and emerging. So I think we have kind of carved ourselves out for newer voices at the moment, which is great because it means we can take a chance on people that might get overlooked by larger publishers, which is always a nice thing to be able to do. And
is it mainly Scottish writers that you're looking at? Because I mean, there's the Gothic tradition obviously is a global one. Are you looking at people from all around the place, or is it just more national?
So ideally in the long run, we would like to see more global kind of Gothic and explore Gothic tropes in different countries and see how that is explored and how that manifests. We did start, our first book was Scottish Gothic, because obviously we wanted to start at home and kind of see how that Gothic tradition, which is so intrinsic in Scotland and intertwined with Scottish storytelling, we wanted to see how that had manifested throughout the centuries. So we had stories from, you know, decades, centuries ago, as well as contemporary ones in our first book. So yeah, we're pretty open to the world.
And in terms of the business of books, what advice would you give to others or those thinking of getting involved?
So I run this company by myself, and I have an in-house copy editor as well, and an office dog, of course.
Of course.
So, but in Scotland, there are a lot of small independent publishing companies like Haunt. And I'd just say, get to know those people. And there's such a strong community here, and everyone is so lovely and willing to help. So I'd say utilize that. When I set Haunt up, I booked multiple consultations with people who were already doing what I wanted to do. So I just paid them for their time and asked them loads of questions. And that's how I found out what I needed to do to set up a business to start with, you know, to register everything, how to even publish a book, what do you even do? So yeah, I would recommend paying other people to help fill in the gaps in your knowledge, because I think trying to do everything yourself is unfeasible and would lead to a lesser quality product or lesser quality experience for everyone involved. So I would say loop in the experts where you can. And yeah, I think for me personally, I needed help with things like contracts, business planning, that kind of thing. So yeah.
And that kind of network, as you're saying, I think it's interesting, I've spoken to other publishers, is that there is a sense, a kind of perhaps a general sense that we're kind of all in this together, small publishers, so let's help each other in the ways that we can, let's share knowledge, let's share ideas. That's what you seem to be promoting as well.
Yeah, definitely. And this is one thing, obviously, with the pandemic, there were a lot of, we didn't have those networking opportunities in person as much. So I tried setting up like a Discord server and, you know, things to loop people together, but it's just never as good as being in person and just chatting and what books are you doing? And, oh, have you had this issue? And so, yeah, it's great. I went to the Publishing Scotland conference, and that was just fantastic, being back with everyone again. Yeah. And picking brains and having my brains picked. It's very zombie horror sounding, but yeah.
And you mentioned doing a master's in publishing, is that right? Yeah,
I did a master's in English literature, and then I did a second one in publishing.
And do you think that is that's been helpful to you?
Yeah, it was so I did it in Anglia Ruskin in Cambridge. I've heard the Stirling and Edinburgh Napier courses are fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I think it helped me kind of get a grips of an overview of publishing. So I'm really grateful for that. But I wouldn't say someone would have to have one to work in publishing, but they are great for internships, networking, getting that knowledge. But equally, I think publishing is looking for people who don't come from that background as well, just to make it more diverse, because obviously universities can be a barrier to certain roles. So, but no, I enjoyed it. Can't complain.
And you mentioned your list. So finally, can you tell us about 3 of your current and future titles you're excited about?
Yeah, of course. So I'll pick like a range of types. So one book, the one that we pushed to 2021, was Where Decay Sleeps by Anna Chung. And that was a collection of 36 poems, all Gothic, of course. And it blends kind of like traditional Gothic imagery, modern technology, Chinese folklore, like all these different kind of elements. And there's a lot of dark humor throughout. Like there's a poem about monsters. If they were on Tinder, what would their bios say? so that's a great poetry collection. We recently published When Other People Saw Us, They Saw the Dead, and that was edited by Lauren T. Davila. And that is an anthology of, I think there's about 24 stories in there, and all written by BIPOC writers. And it deals with, you know, like memory, grief, belonging, but also themes of white supremacy, colonialism, immigration, for example. And that's been doing really, really well. That came out in May. And then in December, we are publishing our first novel, and that is The Gingerbread Men by Joanna Corrance, who is based in the Highlands. It doesn't sound scary, but it is. So I'm pitching it as like a Highland hotel horror, right, where men go to a hotel to work for the woman who manages the hotel, but they can never leave, and it's always snowing, and they don't know why. So it's kind of like The Shining meets Angela Carter in a way. So I'm very excited for that. I know you said 3 books, but I did just, I know, I'm cheating. I successfully crowdfunded a queer Gothic anthology recently called Unthinkable. So I'm just working out the final plans for that. So yeah, it's a very busy year for Haunt.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been lovely to chat to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
I'm now joined by Sarah Hunt, publisher and founder of Saraband Books. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Alistair. Lovely to be here. Nice to see you, as ever.
And thank you for joining me. First of all, can you tell us about Saraband and its history?
So we started in 1994 in the US, kind of because I was working over there at the time, and for one reason or another, I decided to go it alone and set up Saraband. The kind of aim of it, if you like, was filling gaps for overlooked voices, because that was really a much worse problem at the time, even though it still is now. So some of our early titles, we did illustrated non-fiction at that point, and some of our early titles were on women in history, particular kind of ethnic groups and so on, such as the civil rights movement, Native American women. We did a book called Pioneer Women about the US Old West, which is still in print with the University of Oklahoma Press now. But anyway, that was our main focus. We did also some history, arts and architecture. And then in in 2000, I moved to Glasgow. And from there, things kind of changed quite radically in response to sort of industry changes. So in 2011, we took our first fiction, which was kind of a response to digital marketing, digital formats and so on, big kind of revolutions in that side of publishing. And soon after, we opened Contraband, which was a kind of response to Scandi Noir, really, because there wasn't a sort of clever upmarket literary sort of crime and noir type of imprint, and certainly not for Scottish authors. So that started in 2014, our first releases, of which Graham McRae Burnett was one of them. So yes, those are the sort of some of the milestones. Graham, we're now on his second Booker Prize listing, which is fantastic. But we have also had listings and wins in lots of other kind of big prestigious awards, the Wainwright Prize, the Rathbones Folio, Polari, Paul Torday, Theakston's Prize, McIlvanney, lots of them, and regional ones as well. And what's really gratifying is that we have had a lot of wins in first novel or first book awards. Several of those have been Saltire, Scotland's National Book Awards, but others too. So that's always very exciting. And I suppose that apart from our publishing genres, we are as much as possible kind of ethical and sustainable, and trying to be good people in what we do.
Mm-hmm. And do you even think about areas that you focus on, or do you cast your, you've covered a lot of different genres and styles there. Is it just down to the individual book?
Yes, good writing is hugely a part of it. Sometimes if we have a series that is successful, particularly in non-fiction, then we'll try to build on that, and kind of commission something actively. But largely it just has to do with the writing that comes in, and does it appeal to our areas where we have contacts and we can bring something of our own to the book and really believe in it.
You've spoken earlier about getting awards for first novels and things like that, and this podcast and the event are looking at new voices. How important is it that new voices are published, and what are the challenges in doing that?
I mean, I think if you think of it the other way around, and just bear in mind that every single most influential, groundbreaking, best-selling, outstanding voice in fiction or non-fiction was at one point a new voice.
Yeah.
So, that could be someone who's writing in a very well-established tradition or genre, but equally it could be something completely original that seems to come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And if we don't have new voices, then we're just going to have the same old.
Yeah.
So it's completely crucial to the future of books, reading, everything, literature in general.
Right. I mean, that is taking the big picture, but as you know yourself, sometimes people focus on they look for the sure things, and there's always a challenge or a risk with a newer writer, perhaps. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you've talked there a little bit about the business of publishing, but what advice would you give to others thinking of getting involved or beginning even?
So beginning, I would say take a job wherever you can find one in any department, because once you're in, it's much easier to move around for your next job once you have some experience. Also, this varies by the nations around the UK, but the apprenticeship model is a good way in if you can sort of get in that way, as well as, of course, the masters and undergraduate publishing degrees. Definitely book selling, working in a bookshop is really useful experience, and blogging and making yourself aware of the industry and starting to look at anything you can do to impress when you get an interview. I think those are the biggest things. But I mean, I think the other thing I would say is that where we are now with this massive cost of living and economic crisis about to really hit harder than ever, I think just take a step back and ask yourself, do you really, really want to be in publishing? Because it's not that well paid. There are lots of more secure jobs, and there are hundreds of really good things you can do relating to books without being in publishing. So particularly blogging or, becoming a book influencer. So ask yourself if you're willing to take that journey in publishing before you you know, make that commitment, simply because it isn't the easiest career path, although it's very rewarding if you get lucky.
And finally, could you talk us through 3 of your current or future titles that you're excited about?
Well, obviously, my great excitement of this year is Case Study by Graham McRae Burnett. It is really one of the best books I've ever read. I think it's his best book yet. It's hard. I'm so consumed by this title at the moment because it's just been listed for the longlisted for the Booker Prize. So it's hard to take a step back and just simply describe it for someone who hasn't read it, because it's sort of clever and layered, and it doesn't fit a particular genre other than literary fiction, but it's very funny. It's really clever. It's set in the 1960s, and it's about someone who goes to see a kind of rogue, charismatic, very unethical psychotherapist. So that's my first one. Speaking of something that's been out a few months now and is a completely different thing, I'm very excited about a memoir by Catherine Simpson called One Body, a retrospective. And that's it's beautifully written. Again, it's very clear. It's a very important and topical and relevant book. It's funny, but Catherine talks about her experience inhabiting her body and the kind of adventures, if you like, that's brought her, and the kind of, you know, there's obviously misogyny and difficult experiences. And that's a book I'd absolutely recommend for anybody, but I suppose particularly for women readers, although it has had brilliant feedback from men as well. And one we have coming up shortly, again, a different genre, is by Jim Crumley, who I think most people would agree is Scotland's leading nature writer. And this is his kind of magnum opus. It's called Seasons of Storm and Wonder. And it's a book that brings together the work he has been doing in the last 5 years or more on the seasons and the nature that he observes, the wildlife, the landscapes during those seasons, mainly in Scotland, but not entirely. And because this comes at the end of a kind of, well, I won't name the number of decades, but it's north of, 60 years really that he's been observing and writing about nature. It means that he has this huge, long view and is able to really see and distill very clearly the impact of climate change on climate chaos on the areas that he looks at. So the book it's passionate. He is completely uncompromising in defense of nature, and it's absolutely gorgeous writing. He writes beautifully. So this is a book that I can foresee being an absolute landmark of nature writing that's still going to be on the shelves in 50 years' time.
It sounds wonderful, but they all sound wonderful books. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been lovely.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm now joined by Finlay Robson, the Promotions Coordinator for Arkbound Foundation. Hello, Finlay.
Hello, Alistair.
So can you talk a bit about Arkbound and its history?
Yeah, sure. So Arkbound started in 2015 in Bristol with a grant from the Prince's Trust. Basically, the aim was to build a publishing company which publishes books covering important social or environmental themes, written specifically by authors from disadvantaged backgrounds. So this could be those with like lived experiences of what they're writing about. So for instance, one of the first Arkbound books that I came across was a book called TikTok, It's Time to Listen, by a woman called Lauren Smith. So it's a poetry collection which details her experience of kind of progressing through the education system whilst on the autism spectrum. So then a way of developing this, the kind of publishing aspect, the Arkbound Foundation was started. So the foundation side kind of assists the publishing aspect by supporting the writers and helping them grow their skills and their confidence. And this is done through kind of various workshops, events, and like mentorships. For example, we have our Writing Within Walls initiative, which focuses on mentoring prisoners and ex-offenders with a view to building their confidence and hopefully eventually gaining them access into the publishing industry. So the company is constantly growing and expanding into new areas. Like we just launched a crowdfunding website called Crowdbound, which is another method of supporting creative projects that kind of relate to social justice. Yeah, so we have, you know, our fingers in a lot of pies, but I think there's a kind of consistent idea of widening access to literature and just kind of aiming to improve diversity in publishing.
So I was going to ask you what areas you cover, but it's really more, instead of the types of books, it's more about the writers themselves.
Yeah, I guess it's a focus on the individuals and kind of their experiences. And that's kind of what we're trying to get out into the world.
And when you're doing the courses that you mentioned and the kind of support, does everyone get finally published, or is does it depend on the individual again?
No, it would depend. Yeah, it varies. Not everyone would get to publish a book, but generally, I think we tend to publish books from people that we've kind of mentored or we've developed the writing through our workshops and mentorships. Yeah. And
this strand is kind of looking at new voices. How important is it that new voices are published, and what are the challenges in doing so? I mean, you perhaps have different challenges to other publishers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I think the publishing industry and kind of literature in general has kind of always been marked by a sort of like exclusivity or like a kind of superiority complex almost. Like I studied literature at university, and you kind of see the way that classics or books, written by older white guys are elevated above authors from more diverse backgrounds, or those with experience of social injustice. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying classics shouldn't be studied. Like I love classics, but I think the way that those courses are structured or those institutions are structured are kind of emblematic of a wider societal kind of injustice, which I think can be applied to the publishing industry. It is so difficult for writers from disadvantaged backgrounds to break into the industry and get their stuff published because, in part because of that kind of archaic view of what literature is, which is perpetuated in, universities and other institutions. And then obviously, in addition to that, there's, the stereotypes that authors face. So whether they're homeless or they're ex-offenders, or they're just, they're from a disadvantaged background, they'll constantly be facing pushbacks due to how people perceive them. They might not be what publishers or the public see as, like real writers, whatever that means. So yeah, so that's the kind of discrimination that I think Arkbound is looking to kind of subvert, and try and work with these writers and hopefully help them get a foot in the publishing industry. Yeah, we're just trying to challenge stereotypes and show that everyone has the right to really, share their story with the world.
Well, that kind of feeds into my next question, which is, in terms of the business of publishing, what advice would you give to others or those thinking of getting involved?
Well, I mean, it's hard. I've only actually been in the industry for about 2 months, so probably not the best person to come to.
Maybe flip it on its head then. What advice were you given before you were getting involved, and what advice are you being given at the moment?
Well, I think working at a place like Arkbound, I guess you learn, I've learned so far, like how important it is to challenge things. It's obviously not your traditional publishing company. But from the small amount of time I've spent there, you can kind of feel the effects of like a kind of systemic disparity between, you know, bigger established companies or genres or demographics of writers, and then companies like Artbound and what we try and do. So I think, yeah, really just trying to affect change, I think, is something that I would recommend, or like I would say is really important in the publishing industry. And obviously we want to see it expand and include writers with, you know, disabilities or experience of homelessness, etc. And I think the only way that can really happen is from the inside.
Yeah, it does sound to me though that what you do at Artbound, it's the business isn't the priority, for want of a better word. It's the work as a foundation is the main thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, I mean, obviously we need to keep, you know, we need to keep the company running and everything, but you know, everyone with all my colleagues are really passionate about what we do and about, you know, like I said, expanding the industry and just like sharing these really kind of important and unique stories which otherwise wouldn't be published.
So with that in mind, can you tell us a bit about 3 titles, current or future, that you are excited by that Artbound are dealing with?
Yeah, sure. So I think one kind of recent publication, which I think is really interesting, is called Climate Adaptation. So we published that last October to coincide with the COP26 summit. Mm-hmm. And as you can probably guess from the title, it addresses climate change. And what I thought was quite unique about it was its kind of collaborative element. So it brings together all these case studies and models from 16 authors around the world, which I think gives, you know, a really big scope to the book's perspective, which is especially important for an issue, you know, as immense as climate change. And I think it kind of matches the problem's diversity and manages not to focus solely on like a kind of westernized point of view, which is what we're used to. Mm-hmm. So that's really cool. And then I think one that we have coming out in just a couple of weeks, on I think 15th of August, is a book called Invisible Schemes by John McGlade. Right. So it's a kind of sci-fi urban fantasy set in a Scottish housing scheme. Right. So it's a satirical piece which kind of seeks to shine a spotlight on you know, Scottish working class communities by presenting it as this kind of like fantastical, inexplicable place, you know, like a strange, mysterious labyrinth with no beginning and no end. And John is from Glasgow, actually, and I think he's really passionate about showing the deep-rooted hope and kind of power at the heart of these smaller communities. And then, yeah, lastly, I would want to touch on another upcoming publication, which is called Prickles Gets Caught, written by an incredible young woman called Rebecca Buxton, mm-hmm. who is profoundly deaf and dyslexic. And that's going to be released, I think, on the 1st of November. So it has some really cool kind of like interactive elements, like games, recipes, like some great illustrations, which can be colored in by its readers. I think, yeah, it's just like a really heartwarming adventure, which can be used to teach children about the importance of determination, human kindness towards animals and nature. Yeah, so those would be my top 3.
Well, those 3 sound fascinating books. I'm really looking forward to seeing them and reading them. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, Finlay. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be joined now by Anne Glennie from Cranachan. Hello, Anne.
Hello, Alistair.
Can you talk a bit about Cranachan and its history, please?
Well, Cranachan is a small independent publisher. We are based on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. I'm very lucky I can see the Atlantic Ocean from my desk. So that's a big plus point here. I run Cranachan with my husband, so we're just a small husband and wife team. So that's us now in our 7th year, because we started in 2016, and things are going quite well. This year in March, we won the Small Press of the Year award at the British Book Awards, and that was for the Scottish region. So that was major for us. It was massive, and it's going to fuel our fire, I think, for a wee while longer. It shows us that we're, what we're doing is recognised. What we're doing seems to be working. So that was a huge thing for us this year.
And what areas is it that you cover? What's your kind of the main focus of what you do?
Well, we publish children's and young adult or teen fiction, but we do that with a Scottish flavour. So that could be that it's a Scottish setting, Scottish characters, the author might be Scottish, or the language used in the book might be Scots, or even occasionally there's a little smattering of Gaelic sometimes as well. We have 2 imprints. We have Whay Hae, and that's our imprint for readers that are aged 8 to 12. And then we have our Gobstopper imprint, and that's our YA imprint, or books for teens, if you like. We really cover everything, although we do have a very strong focus on Scottish historical fiction for children, because we really found that there was quite a gap in the market there, which we have tried to fill. So that's one of the main things that we focus on, because one of our main markets as well is also schools and teachers. I'm a former primary teacher, and that's why I'm really passionate about publishing for children and getting high quality books that reflect Scotland, that reflect their experience, and getting them into their hands in the classroom.
I think that's a really important thing to be covering, absolutely. And how important is it that new voices are published, and what are the challenges in doing so? Dealing with young adult and children's writing, are there more new voices? Are the writers that you deal with almost all new to writing?
Yes, I mean, something that really keeps me going at Cranachan is the fact that when I think about the authors that we've published, and in my opinion, I'm biased, of course, the high quality writing and the high quality books that we've published, what amazes me is that many of these books would not have been published if Cranachan hadn't existed. And that scares me sometimes, because when you see the talent that our authors have, and I think, well, what would have happened if Cranachan didn't exist to publish these brilliant books, to get these talented voices out there? So it's absolutely crucial. The challenge for me, while there are of course lots of challenges in being an indie publisher, the thing that I suppose bothers me, or I find a challenge, is I just find our authors are incredibly talented, and as a small publisher, I just hope that I'm doing their voices, their stories, their books justice with the limited resources that I have, compared to, let's say, a larger publisher, and what the experience might have been for them with a larger publisher who had, more funds, more marketing, more everything.
But I guess, as you say, perhaps the chances are they wouldn't have got picked up at all. It's interesting because there was this myth for a while that children and young adults kind of have moved away from reading, but it seems to me that young adult in particular is an area which has actually grown in recent years. Is that something you've found?
I think that the lockdown, really, everybody knows that fueled reading in a massive way. Look at things like even just book talk on TikTok, for example. There's this resurgence of interest in reading, which can only be a good thing. I'm always, with my teacher hat on, I'm also a literacy consultant. My concern is always about keeping reading going in the advent of, everyone having a phone in their hand. So things like book talk, I just hope, things like lockdown, I hope these things continue to have that impact, and that resurgence is sustained in reading, particularly for young people and teenagers, when there are so many demands on their time, when they all have devices where they can choose to do anything on that phone, and sometimes reading can be perhaps seen as you have to put a bit of effort in to get the reward. So yeah, I'm hopeful that those gains will be sustained.
And that feeds a little bit into my next question, which is about the business of publishing. What advice would you give to others or those thinking about getting involved?
Well, being in any kind of startup is tough, but being a startup publisher is, I would say, particularly tough. You really need to do your homework and in particular do your sums. I really suppose came into the business quite naively, thinking that loving books would be enough. But it's not enough when you start to look at the figures. The margins are so tight. You know, if you think what really shocked me when I entered the industry was when I started to discover the deep discounts that were required to sell your books. So you have to think very carefully about how you're going to make it work for you, because you know, once you've printed your book, once you've paid your authors, your distributor, your sales and marketing, you don't have a lot left to work with. Now, yes, I'm giving a bit of a warning, but on the positive side, I was very lucky to be involved with the Publishing Scotland programme Accelerate training, and that was for new publishers. And there was a whole squad really of new publishers that started around the same time as Cranachan. So publishing houses like 404 Inc., Charcoal Press, Scotland Street Press, Little Door Books. And you know what? Despite the challenges, these small publishing houses are still absolutely going strong and are still on the scene. So if you're determined, if you're passionate, and if that determination is limitless, then it's absolutely possible.
Yeah, that is great to hear. So finally, Anne, can you tell us a bit about 3 of your current or future titles that you're excited about?
Well, gosh, there's so much to be excited about at the moment. I'm very excited about our main release for 8 to 12s this year, which is The Rewilders by Lindsay Littleson. We're especially excited because it has orange sprayed edges, so it's a beautiful book to behold. But we're also really excited because Lindsay's appearing at the school's gala day at the Edinburgh International Book Festival, and that's part of their special schools programme. So there's going to be, I believe, quite a few children there listening to Lindsay talking about rewilding and about her book that essentially deals with 2 children. They have to essentially rewild a lynx kitten that one of their grants has accidentally stolen. So it's about their journey into the Scottish Highlands and rewilding this beautiful animal. Another book that we have coming out this year, it's part of our YA fantasy series, The Four Treasures by Caroline Logan. And this is going to be the 4th and final book in the series. So if you like YA fantasy with a twist, it's a twist on the world of fae or fairies, because it's all based on Scottish myths and legends, and it has a kind of Scottish feeling landscape as well. So there's 3 previous books to get your teeth into before The Spear of Truth comes out on the 6th of October. And then just as a wee tease, the last one, it's not been officially announced yet, really, I suppose, till now. It's one by one of our main authors, Barbara Henderson, and this one is called Rivet Boy. Again, it's for 8 to 12s. This one is based on real events and real people. It's Scottish historical fiction. And this follows one boy's role in the building of the iconic 4th rail bridge in Victorian times. Now, this was a major project, of course, to be involved in, and our hero of the story is John Nichol. This was a real boy who was alive and lived and worked on the bridge. He's sent, after his father dies, he's sent to work on the bridge because he has become the breadwinner for the family. There's only one snag: he is afraid of heights. It's a fabulous book because it's based on stuff that really happened. It brings the bridge to life. The bridge is an actual character in the book. But the flip side to that is John finds solace in the first Carnegie Library in Scotland. So he befriends the librarian, So it has this lovely contrast of the two, the noise of the bridge and then the quiet solace that he finds in the library. So that's one to watch for out in February next year.
That sounds fantastic. Well, thank you, Anne, for taking the time to talk to me. It's been lovely talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have a wee chat and tell everybody what we're up to here. So thanks so much for having me on.
I'm now joined by Nathaniel Konitsky, publisher of Knight Errant Press. Hello, Nathaniel.
Hiya. Nice
So
to meet
first
you.
of all, can you tell us about Knight Errant and its history?
Well, Knight is quite a young press, as far as I'm aware. It started in 2017 with an idea for an anthology I had around gender and gender identity, based on my personal experience of trying to find writing that was a bit more approachable than sociology books or very often traumatic autobiographical accounts. I wanted something not necessarily lighthearted, but just a variety of formats that kind of explore gender, and that came from the UK, because a lot of the things that I was interested in reading from the LGBT side of publishing was sourced in from the US publishers, and I thought that was quite a shame because I thought we had quite a big community in the UK. And then when the anthology came to be, I thought, well, since I've already done one book, I might as well set up a press and see where it takes me. And that's how Knight Errant came to be. And it's been going for the last 4 years, yeah. And we started off with a couple of publications, and because it's something that I'm doing beside my other employment and commitments, it's going to stay a micropress, but we're aiming as a group. I have a few people working with me to make it a sustainable long-term micropress so that it continues publishing people for a long time, even though it's it's a very small scale that we work on.
And what areas do you specialize in?
We specialize in, well, I think people would consider us a queer press based on how many queer writers have published, and we've kind of taken that mantle on. I think we started off looking for LGBT voices and BPOC voices and just a variety of voices and writers and stories. And I think that's, it's not necessarily a specialism, but it is considered a niche. So I would say LGBTQI literature plus other diverse and intersectional writers and stories. And we do a variety of formats as well, although our preference is for the shorter format. So short story collections, poetry, flash fiction, novellas or shorter novels, and short graphic novels.
And how important is it that new voices are published, and what are the challenges in doing so?
I actually found that quite a difficult question. I was thinking about it because, and I realized that it's not new voices that, well, it's great to have new voices, new people, everything, new generation, blah, blah, blah. If we had the same people published all the time, which we do sometimes, it gets a bit boring. You don't get new readers by publishing the same stuff over and over. But the problem, I think, is not publishing a variety of voices. So it's not always the newness that matters, like the new debut, new this, new that, but it's the variety of people, stories, and points of view that get published that I think matters a bit more. And it is difficult. I don't think it's I don't think there's a practical difficulty in publishing new people. I think apart from sometimes I think publishers don't take a risk on developing writers. So they will take people who have either worked so long on their manuscript, it's practically ready to go, or people who have a really long history of writing and maybe have not been published yet, but have a lot of experience writing and maybe don't take chances or risks of developing works as much as they used to. So that's maybe the practical barrier. I think everything else really is a like a format barrier. Again, everybody writes novels. And I think there's also the issue of, I'm this kind of person, and I'm also happen to be the editor. I happen to be in this kind of environment, know these kind of people, believe in these sorts of things. So I will unconsciously or pick things that fit within that world. And even if they stand out, it's within my limits of acceptance.
I think that's why small independent publishers are so important, because then you do get a kind of hopefully wider variety of styles and writers and voices.
Yeah.
And in terms of the business of publishing, what advice would you give to others or those thinking about getting involved?
Oh,
You've got a smile on your face.
I think first and foremost, people need to understand that publishing, as much as we work with books and artists and writers and stories, it's a business. And I think, sorry, the business side advice would be, remember that it's a job, that you have rights, that you shouldn't just do overtime for no pay because you love books.
Yeah.
And a business that makes you do that isn't one that's run well. Publishing finally has unions, so consider joining one or setting one up if your work conditions aren't up to standard. And in terms of starting one's own business, it's hard work, many unpaid hours. It is very rewarding, which is why I keep doing it. I do love supporting people. I love bringing new voices out in the world. I love the feedback. I love that when I meet readers and when the authors are, when I'm launching the authors in their career. That's something that Erin does quite a lot, is being a step into the bigger world of publishing for authors. And that in itself is, I think, a great thing to do. But when you set up, I think it's important that people realize the time commitment, the very real emotional burnout of working unpaid on all these projects, and that it's important to have capital and funding to start these things up. I feel like my advice went kind of scattered. I love doing what I do because while I work a very different job, and that actually gives me a good work-life balance, and I get good pay for what I do, I then am able to like fulfill myself creatively and in my professional while doing Night Erin, and I'm super grateful for that, and I'm quite happy with it as it is, because whenever some publishing opportunities in terms of work come up, I find that they always fall below my expectation of work-life balance, but also especially pay, which is really disheartening. And I know that that pay, even if it's a bit higher, will then be, oh, but can you stay for the weekend? Can you work in the evenings and things? So
I think a lot of people will recognize that, and that's very practical advice. But you mentioned rewards, so let's talk about some of those rewards. Can you tell us about 3 of your current or future titles that you're excited about?
Oh, so I can't quite mention them because they've not been announced.
Right.
But my most recent title, Tamlin by Aidan Wildsmith, is a really beautiful graphic novel, and it was like the first for me to work on a full-length graphic storytelling and edit it as well. So that's been out since November last year, but it's an all-year season type of book. It's a retelling of a classic folk song from the borders, and for the borders of Scotland, but the borders area, called Tamlin, and it has a variation of names, but the author gender bent the story and changed some of the details, and it's very beautiful and it's quite empowering. And the next stories that we will be publishing, I can tell like vague details because the ones that we actually signed on will be published next year, and they're all feature some sort of element of folklore retelling, or maybe a little bit of unease and uncanny horror, and deal with like quite contemporary issues. And I'm trying not to give too much away. I think I'm being quite weak, but yes, they're mostly probably would be novellas as well. Right. So in line with my current obsession with short form, and we've been having a lot of great submissions to a point where I'm feeling like I'm having to shortlist before I make decisions, because every next one I read is very high quality. So I'm just creating a shortlist before I make my final decision. Well, we'll look out for those when they are published. It sounds very interesting. Thank you, Nathaniel. It's been really good to talk to you. I'm joined now by publisher and co-founder of Charcoal Press, Samuel McDowell. Hello, Samuel.
Hi, Alistair. How are you? It's a pleasure to speak to you.
I'm very well, thanks. So first of all, can you tell us a bit about Charcoal Press and its history?
Sure. So Charcoal Press, we're an Edinburgh-based publisher, started by myself and my partner. Our first books came out in 2017, and our focus is on contemporary Latin American literature. So, so books coming out in that part of the world that we then translate from either the Spanish or the Portuguese, in the case of it's coming out from Brazil, into English, to then be made available to readers in the UK and beyond, to English-speaking readers. And in that time, you know, we've had a lot of quite great critical success or great critical feedback on what we're doing, and I think I'd have to mention that our proudest achievement is that in that time we've had 3 finalists for the International Booker Prize, which is the biggest prize that we can possibly participate in with our translated works.
And I was going to ask you what areas you specialise in, but that kind of is what you specialise in. Why did you choose? I'm interested in why that was something you chose to focus on.
Sure. So translated fiction is an area that that we feel is probably poorly represented in the Anglophone world. My partner, the other co-founder of Charco, is a specialist in Latin American literature, and she was also a teacher of it at university. And when we were actually traveling and living in Latin America, we were looking at some of the authors and some of the literature that was sort of making waves in that part of the world, and we would look and check to see what was available in English, mainly because my Spanish is not very good, in order for me to read it. And we just noticed that just very little was making it through, and we thought that it was that wasn't right. We thought that readers here should have the opportunity to explore these voices. A lot of them get translated into European languages, into French, German, Italian, some into Chinese, Hebrew, but so few of them make it through into English, because in the Anglophone world, our consumption of translated works is very, very small. So just in fiction, you're looking at around about 4% of all fiction sold in this country was actually originally written in another language to English. And you compare that to European nations, where it's more like on sort of 12 to 18%. Right. So it's just something that that we felt, you know, we need to provide this bridge and this opportunity, because it's so important to have these ideas shared, you know, and to read about other people's experiences that are outside your own lives and your own experience, and learn what it is that's different, but also more importantly, what it is that makes us very, very similar, no matter where we're from.
That maybe adds another dimension to this next question. This podcast is focusing on new voices. How important is it that new voices are published, and what are the challenges in doing so? You may have different challenges from most.
Yeah, so I guess we can look at this. There's probably a different interpretations of what new voices mean. So it could be an author, a Scottish author who's you know, just trying to get their first book published, and there's, you know, the importance of new voices in that aspect being brought out and being made available to readers, I think, is extremely important. Our new voices are slightly different. We're talking about authors that are established, are prize-winning authors that have you know, they've got a career of books under their belts, but they've never been made available in English, and so they're a new voice to English readers. But the importance of that is, it touches on what I was just referring to before. It's around that sharing of cultures. It's that, you know, storytelling and sharing of stories is such a core part of what it is to be human, and it's how we understand each other. So if we're trying to really understand the world we live in and other cultures that we live with as well. You know, for us, it's very important that we are providing the ability to share these stories across those cultures and across those languages.
Yeah, it's interesting because we often talk about the importance of diverse voices, but often we look upon that at a national level rather than an international level.
Exactly, diversity. I think, you know, it can be cut a number of different ways. It's important at a national level, but you know, it's also important to say, you know, well, let's look at what's happening in countries in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, you know, it's where there's underrepresentation within a country. Maybe they are a developing nation and they don't have a big literary scene, but you know, we've got next year our first author from Bolivia that we're bringing out, and you know, Bolivia, you never come across, very rarely come across a Bolivian author that's available in English, and so that sort of diversity, I think, is really important as well, in terms of, you know, new voices and making sure that, you know, not everybody has to read this, but if it's available and people find it and enjoy it, and they you know, learn to maybe live a day in someone else's shoes, as it were. I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's not available, they definitely won't read it. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, exactly.
And in terms of the business side of publishing, what advice would you give to others, or those thinking of getting involved?
Yeah, don't do it. No. No.
Someone was going to say that.
Yeah, it was always going to be me, I'm sure. Alistair, I think the question, the way you've asked, it's quite well put. The business of publishing, because publishing a book is actually pretty easy. Getting out there and, you know, getting a book and getting it to print and etc. So that side of it is easy. The business of publishing is hard. There's a lot of challenges out there within the industry that just make it very difficult for independent publishers to sort of get a toehold. I won't bore you with all the big long list of what those challenges are, but it is really tricky. And so my advice would be not get into it, but my advice would be to really take some time to try and understand what those challenges are. Speak to some independent publishers. Get bodies like Publishing Scotland, for example, who are, you know, a really great resource for publishers here in Scotland, and really try and make sure you go in with your eyes open, is what I would say. That you're not just thinking, oh, I've got a passion for publishing books, because at the end of the day, that becomes the easiest part and kind of the most enjoyable part. There's all these other things you have to get sorted out as well.
Well, talking about passion, I was wondering if you could tell us about 3 of your current or future titles that you're excited about.
Yeah, sure. So the first one I was going to mention was Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, and this is by an Argentinian author, and this was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize this year. So just a couple of months ago, we were down in London for that prize. So it's a great book that really has it's a bit of a mystery, a little bit of a sort of and there's a real twist at the end that everybody sort of gets knocked sideways by. The second book I wanted to talk about has just come out in July. This is by Mexican author Ave Barrera. It's called The Forgery. And this is a really fun summer read. Often people think about translated fiction as being quite hard and dense or difficult, but this is kind of a caper of a forger who's been given a task to try and recreate an artwork by sort of a underworld figure, and it's a sort of a caper across the city. A really, really good, getting a lot of great feedback for summer. So that one's something I'd recommend. And the other one I thought I would talk to you about really quickly. This is called Homesick by Jennifer Croft. Now, this is actually, the reason I want to talk about this one, it's coming out in a couple of months, but it's because this is the first of what is called our untranslated series, just to be confusing. This one was a book that was originally written in English by Jennifer Croft. Jennifer is a translator, a very, very, very well-known translator. She does work for us and as well as many other publishers. But this is a book that she's written herself. So that's us branching out into extending what we do into not just translated fiction, but something that still has a connection to translation, but was written originally in English. So they're the 3 I thought I wanted to talk to you about today.
They all sound fantastic. Samuel, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been great.
Absolute pleasure, Alistair. Thank you for the time.
And I'm now joined by Shah Nazir, publisher from BHP Comics. Hello, Shah.
Hey, Alistair, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you. First of all, can you tell us about BHP Comics and its history?
Sure. Yeah, we're a small kind of essentially kind of boutique indie publisher, focusing on comic books and graphic novels. And we started out making floppy comics, which are sort of like monthly comics.
Right.
Back when we started out, and then which wasn't really great for the UK kind of market. And then we moved from that into a hybrid version of what we are now, which is the book market and the comic specialist market. So making books with spines, having shelf life, and doing all that kind of stuff.
I have to ask, what exactly does floppy comics refer to?
So floppy comics are comics which are basically staple bound.
Right.
So staple bound, and they have no physical spine.
Yeah.
So hence they're called floppies, and the cover weight is the same as the internal weight.
Right. Okay, that's interesting.
Which is a very technical publisher thing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're here. But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you actually, is publishing comics markedly different to other types of publications?
Yeah, it really is. And I think the more I've kind of got into understanding how the book market works in the UK and abroad, the more I kind of see how different and how much more specialized comics publishing is and graphic novel publishing is than publishing mainstream horror or graphic novel, horror novels or poetry or general fiction. There's much more aligned with all of those things than there is with making comics and graphic novels. So it makes it it's its own little thing, and it takes a while to unwrap and unravel what those things are and how it works. Because even like basics of like, it physically costs for creative production, it physically costs much more money to make a story in a graphic novel form than it does to send off a writer and kind of go, maybe the next crime masterpiece. Where one person goes off and then an editor drops in every now and then. Whereas we've got, a colorist, a writer, an artist, an editor, and possibly an inker, a designer. Then it's all there's a lot more pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that before, but I guess even for something like one a comic, as everyone would understand it, there's a whole team of people needed for that.
Yeah, it's much more akin and much more aligned with how theatre productions are made and with screen media. So the sort of, obviously screen media is comics multiplied by 1,000 in terms of the number of creatives that's required to make something kind of happen. But there's sort of parallels between those, and particularly between that and stage performance is much closer, because you're working inside a box.
Yeah.
And your visual and narrative storytelling.
And someone is setting the stage and someone is colouring the stage and all of those things.
Yeah.
And in terms of what you cover at BHP, do you have genres that you go into, or is it just whatever you think is worthwhile telling?
Well, we started out kind of, I think we started out making things that we just wanted to make, which is something as a publisher is always a good place to kind of work from, something that you like. And then I started experimenting with genres and doing different kinds of stuff. And you discover what works and what doesn't work. And now I've just kind of gone back to kind of just going, what's the zeitgeist? Where are we right now? And actually, what is it that I want to make? And what's interesting? What's fun? So yes, we do have horror. We don't have horror, but we do have like sci-fi and cyberpunk, speculative fiction, with feminist and proactive kind of comics, which are kind of a little bit of kind of like a learning strand of what we do, and trying and kind of create things that yes have a message and have a good moral or ethical kind of background and a spine that we can dress some fantastical stuff around, And it's only recently, only this year that we've started making superhero comics, which we never touched before.
Right.
We were like, we're not going to make superhero comics. We're not, because everyone else does it, and it's like everyone's doing a great job of doing it. So it was the remit for us was only if we ever found the right thing that we wanted to make and had the right story at the right time, then we would make it. So we did, and we kind of got into that space and found the right story and the right people to work on it, the right kind of creative teams, and that's all kind of come together. Yeah.
And part of what we're looking at with these podcasts and the events that are linked to it are new voices and how important it is for new voices to come through.
Yeah.
And is that the case with the comic book world and graphic novels, that it's important to get new voices in there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's always, like, for us, there's always been that element there of developing new voices and getting people across and getting people to put other people over. So we have, because we have established names that also work with us, it's great for them because they're already in a place, and then they add a value to us, and then they add a value to those other artists and writers that are working alongside us, who are new and emerging names, and they get to help them put them over,
Yeah.
And for us, particularly for me, it's become much more prevalent in the past kind of few years for me to kind of find voices that are not just white voices. It's to find people of color who are working in comics, or want to work in comics, and to get them to tell their stories, or start telling stories through their own kind of words and pictures. So actually the most recent work that we did, which is a superhero /spy /fantastical adventure stuff that we did, are all I think 90% of the creative teams across all 4 books are all people of color, from across the UK, which is great. And pretty much most of them are all brand new.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking, is because for you, it's not just saying new voices, new writers, but it's new voices, new artists, new, there's not colorists, there's all sorts of different things. And do you then have think, well, I'll pair this new artist with this more established writer? Are there things like that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff does kind of go through our minds, if it's the right kind of pairing and if it's the right kind of person. But for the majority of the teams that we put together, there was maybe someone who had just been emerging with somebody new, completely new, and there was only one case where we had 2 completely brand new writer and artist that came on board, but they both blew us away with what the kind of creative works that they made, and they were just, we also did it as a mentoring project as well. So we mentored them as we were doing the creative works, and I think that really helped them understand who we are, understand what kind of industry expectations there would be, and what we were expecting in that kind of world. And then I think that helped inform them more and drove them more kind of forward in creating what they ended up making.
So, and in terms of the business of publishing, what advice would you give to others or those thinking about getting involved?
I give the same advice that Tony Bennett, who's you're probably not familiar with, but he's a publisher at Knockabout,
right,
graphic novels, who's based down in England, and he's been a long-standing publisher in the UK scene for the past kind of 20-30 years, and published everything from Alan Moore to Neil Gaiman and all those kind of guys, Hunt Emerson, and he said to me that he thought I was crazy for anyone to go into publishing comics or graphic novels. And you never quite understand the realism of what he says, but it's really, really hard, and it's really, really difficult. So yeah. So what was the question? Was the question, do I have a nugget of advice?
Any advice? And then you smiled on your face and you were thinking about the advice that you'd been given.
The advice I was given was don't do it, because it's really, really, really hard. Unless you absolutely love it. Unless you absolutely love it and you have an absolute passion for what it is that you want to do. And I think as a publisher, normally as a publisher, you have to be an absolute optimist in all forms, because you're always taking a risk, and it's never a calculated risk in some cases, because you don't know what people will like or not like.
Yeah, sure.
So it has to come from a place where you believe what you're making, you believe in the creative people that you're working with, and as long as you never lose sight of what it is, why you're doing it, then that'll help you drive forward.
Yeah. And finally, could you tell us about 3 of your current or future titles that you're excited about?
I'm excited to sort of get the release of our new kind of superhero kind of lineup coming out. Those are all one-shot comics, so they're called Storm Hunter, Principal, The Losers Club, and The Agents of MI7. And all 4 books of those, we've kind of gone old school, and we've made them as floppies.
Right.
But they're all independent one-shot stories, but there's a narrative thread that runs through all of them. So
Right.
that'll be released later or early next year as a collected edition called Age of Powers. And then next year we've got the final version, the final volume of Kiltopia Volume 5 coming out. And that's a big cyberpunk book for us, and it's done really, really well.
Right.
And it's currently being adapted into a TV show and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of exciting things happening around it just now. And that's it. That's all I can remember off the top.
Well, Sha, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been fascinating.
That's great. Cheers. Thank you, everyone.
And to round up this New Voices podcast, I'm now joined by Vikki Reilly from Publishing Scotland. Hello, Vikki.
Hello.
So first of all, how does Publishing Scotland support new voices and new writers?
Well, I mean, obviously, being published in Scotland, our main remit is to support publishers. But over the last few years, and particularly during the pandemic, we decided to do a little bit more of the customer-facing stuff, which would therefore promote the authors of our member publishers more, as well as the work that we do with our publishers. So we've been doing a lot of events, particularly with new writers. We've done a lot of debut showcases. So not just for the event that we've done with the book festival, which we did this year and last year. And but during Book Week Scotland, we've been doing a lot of work with Book Week Scotland, particularly promoting debut writers. And we do a lot of promotions online as well for our debut writers, just like sort of roundups and things like that for the Books from Scotland site. So Books from Scotland is the website that's part of Publishing Scotland, which is more of a customer-facing site, and it's about promoting all the books from Scotland and all the authors from Scotland. So we do regular features with debut authors, and we do lots of different stuff, not only with Books from Scotland, but also with Scottish Books International, which is also another part of the company as well, which seeks more to promote our authors abroad. And we've been doing lots of profiles and things like that for that website too. And particularly this year as well, with Year of Scotland Stories, we've been doing a lot more extra online stuff too. So creative responses to books, which is mostly new books, a couple of classics, but mostly new books, and publisher profiles, book recommendations to read. So we just try and make sure that the new voices get shouted out about as much as we can.
And I suppose for you, new voices, it's not just new writers, but new publishers as well.
Yeah, because oftentimes it's the new publishers that bring a lot of the new voices to the public as well. I mean, independent publishing is probably at the forefront of finding new voices for us to read. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's independent publishers that are, making the bulk of the Booker short long list this time round and all that kind of thing. So yeah, so we've got as many members as we've ever had. There's new micro presses all the time joining Publishing Scotland, and it's really great to see that there's just such an energy from people around the country to work in publishing and to bring new books to readers across the country.
And do you think that's increased over recent times, that there are more small independent publishers that are appearing and doing it for themselves?
Yeah, definitely. I think because of technology, it's easier to create books now and to publish books. Everything can be done digitally, like the creation of the book, the editorial and all that kind of stuff, but also a lot of marketing and things can be done online and through digital means too. So yeah, I think it's never been, well, I say it's never been easier, but it's also never been more challenging as well, because there's always challenges, particularly for new publishers to break through and sustain what they're doing.
And what practical advice does Publishing Scotland offer in terms of support for individuals or companies involved in the business of books?
Well, I mean, that's that's our whole remit, really, is that is what we do. We're an organisation that gives practical help to our member publishers. So we do tons of training on all different aspects of publishing, from proofreading to editorial, but we're doing a lot more digital training at the moment, particularly with marketing, and we're even doing a TikTok session next month, because that's the biggest craze in getting books in readers' hands, and it does work. So it's a very useful thing to know about. But we're also doing things like Amazon masterclasses to help you be able to sell your books through Amazon better. We do a lot of networking for them as well, so they get to meet the key personnel in the trade as well, to make sure that they get their books into the bookshops as well. We do we've got our fellowship coming up this month, and that's when we bring publishers from across the world to Scotland, and we take them around Scotland to meet our publishers so that they can do rights deals and meetings like that. So we really champion and advocate and give the practical information and opportunities to all the member publishers that we have.
And for people listening to this or watching this, how best to get that from you? How best to get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, we've got a criteria to be a member, so you have to have published at least 2 books that aren't your own, and you also have to have like a plan to publish more. But I think that's a pretty decent criteria for new people to be able to join us. And then you get in touch with our membership manager, Lucy Feather, and we talk through just all the bits and bobs that we need from publishers and from us, and we explain what we do and all the member benefits and all that kind of thing. So if you just go into the Publishing Scotland website, that's probably the best port of call, because all the information's there. And then once you join, you get to meet the rest of the team, and we go over all our different remits, and then that's how we start working together.
And this event kind of has, and the events you talked about elsewhere, have really brought together writers and publishers in a way that maybe hasn't happened so much in the past. Is the kind of understanding of each other's roles a really important one?
I think so, because a lot of the time, folk think that publishing is a bit of a mystery. It's a bit of a dark art or a dark industry, and also I think people that enjoy reading are actually quite fascinated by the publishing process. So it seems normal to us to be able to host events and to do events where we sort of lay bare what the processes are, and introduce people to the work that goes behind bringing the book to the reader.
And tell us a little bit about the relationship between the Book Festival and Publishing Scotland, because you're partnering up for this event. So it'd be nice to know what that relationship is like.
Yeah, we do various things with the Book Festival. So for the Book Festival proper, we're the sort of liaison between the Book Festival and our member publishers to, for example, to get their books into the bookshop, and for the various different promotions in the Edinburgh Book Festival bookshop. We also host pitching sessions with the Book Festival like months in advance of the festival, so that our member publishers can pitch their authors to the festival as well. And then we also collaborate on events like this. So there's events that we host as well, like the one with this week, but also we help, because they do a lot of business of book events. They've got more, which is more than the one that we're doing with them, and we just sort of advise them on the kind of issues, questions, people that they could get in touch with, just to help them make sure that that those events work really well too. So it's just a general collaborative relationship. And also with the Scottish Books International strand of what we do, the Book Festival is our partner in that as well. So we work closely together with the festival to, because as well as of us promoting our publishers abroad, we work with them to promote not only our publishers and our authors, but our festivals and our events and our whole trade, really, just to show the world Scotland's damn good at what at the book industry.
That's a perfect place to leave it. Vikki, thanks for talking to me. It's always a pleasure. Well, I hope you enjoyed the Shaping Scotland Stories New Voices podcast. Thanks to Edinburgh International Book Festival for asking Scots Whay Hae to be involved, and thanks to all our publishers for talking to us, as well as the book festival's Sophie Moxon and Vikki Reilly from Publishing Scotland. And if you enjoyed what you've heard, then you may want to check out the rest of Scots Whay Hae's podcasts, which you'll find over at scotswayhae.com. But for now, thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your book festival.